Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible and Page. I am Paige, your caffeine-imbued host. And as usual, here's my coffee. Say it with me. In the beginning, coffee. And lo, it was very good. Well, here we are, the first podcast for the Christmas season 2025. I've decided that my first essay is going to be on chess. In the midst of the Christmas devotionals this year, I've been asking myself repeatedly, apart from all the interesting human and cultural details surrounding Mary, the shepherds, the Magi, what does this Christmas mean to me? I think perhaps the one sentence that comes to mind is, respect God's long game and his end game. What do I mean by that? Well, growing up in Alaska as I did, there were times when we were snowed in and couldn't go to school. Mom and Dad would also stay home from work, and the four of us, Mom, Dad, my younger brother, and I, we would have round-robin chess tournaments with the four players alternately playing each other to determine that day's champion. Believe it or not, those were some of the most fabulous family times we had together, laughing, eating, drinking, playing chess. Dad taught us things through chess. It's like, think about your long game. I remember those words. In other words, he was saying, try to think a few moves ahead of where you are right now. The goal in chess is to make the other guy go where you want him to go, because you've already planned his demise. That's the challenge of chess. Of course, Dad and Mom were almost always beating us children, because they were really good at it, and we were really not. But that doesn't mean I forgot the lesson. According to my dad, the real heart of chess wasn't simply winning pieces or even winning the game. It was learning to respect the long game, the slow, deliberate unfolding of strategy that rewards patience over impulse. In a much bigger way, God's long game is the redemption of humanity and the ultimate defeat of the enemy of our souls, Satan. What looks like scattered moves or unrelated events is often part of a far greater plan. When my dad played chess, he had a way of making you think that the entire battle was taking place on one side of the board. He'd stir up action, knight starting forward, rook sliding into position, maybe even a dramatic move with his queen to lure your focus to exactly where he wanted it. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the board, he was quietly assembling the real threat. While I was busy reacting to the commotion he created on the right side, trying to outthink his knight or protect myself from his queen, he was calmly preparing a trap on the left, and sooner or later, that trap would spring shut. By the time I realized what he'd been building, it was already too late. Playing against my dad felt like trying to outguess a man who was always 3 steps ahead. I honestly cannot remember a single time I ever beat him. What I do remember is that sudden sinking feeling when I'd realized the game was already lost, and he had known it long before I did. Now, let's talk about God's long game for a second. Eve was given a prophetic word, saying that she was going to have a descendant and that the serpent would bite its heel and the descendant's heel would crush the serpent's head. That's a metaphor, a picture of the death and resurrection of the Messiah and the destruction of the enemy of our souls, Satan. That's God telling you what his end game is. That's the end game, the destruction of Satan and the resurrection of the Messiah. But what about his long game? Well, that's how he gets to his end game. The long game is how you get to your end game. Think about this for a second. He had to have a chosen people. So he tells Abraham, I'm going to bring forth a nation from you. And in his old age, he had 2 sons. Isaac, his preferred son, becomes the father of Jacob, who had a son, Joseph, who would be the protector of his people in Egypt. And in Egypt, they would become slaves. But in Egypt, they would also become a nation. This nation comes out of Egypt with Moses, ends up going into the promised land, and eventually settles in the promised land, Israel, to become a nation. But in order to do that, they had to become slaves. To become free, they had to become slaves. Two opposite circumstances, seemingly unrelated, but inextricably linked nonetheless. Now let's skip forward to a little shepherd boy. His name is David, the most unlikely candidate who becomes king of this nation, Israel. He has a son, Solomon, who reigns over the golden age of Israel, and upon his death, the kingdom splits up and then starts living in open disobedience to God. God eventually sends Israel off into captivity, eventually to a place called Babylon. Now remember, this is all part of God's long game. Now it's in Babylon that certain members of the Jewish community come to the attention of the king. Now we're talking about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel never compromises his life with God, which gets him and his friends in trouble. With all of that, they are absorbed into the government of that pagan nation, holding prestigious positions of power and authority. Israel is eventually set free to go back home to rebuild the temple, to rebuild Jerusalem. Daniel doesn't leave with them, though. He stays behind. Maybe he was too old. Maybe he had a position of influence and power that he was not willing to give up. Whatever the reason, Daniel stayed behind. This is an important part of God's long game. And out of that decision comes a sect of a politically powerful group of royal advisors called the Magi. Daniel, who has become a Magi, writes a prophetic account concerning the coming Messiah who would be cut off after a fixed number of years. And this sect of the Magi paid attention. They did their math. They counted the years. And when the set number of years had been accomplished, they saw signs in the heavens. And with this prophetic word from Daniel, they left to find this king of the Jews. We know that story. They go to Herod. Herod tells them, he's going to be in Bethlehem. And they go to Bethlehem and worship the Messiah there. They give him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. See, all this is part of God's long game. Cue frightening music. Herod is going to try to kill Jesus. So Joseph, Mary, and Jesus fled to Egypt. And with this gold, frankincense, and myrrh to support the family, they were able to stay away from Herod until he died. After Herod's death, they returned from Egypt and they set up house in Nazareth. Before Mary and Joseph, God was preparing the cosmic chessboard for his finishing moves, his endgame. All these seemingly unrelated events, Abraham, Daniel, David, Isaac, this was his long game. It had to take place before the Messiah could come to Israel. That birth in the stable in Bethlehem signaled the end of God's long game and the beginning of what we call his end game, or what I call his end game. When Jesus starts revealing himself in his earthly ministry, he comes to the attention of the enemy of our souls. The enemy of our souls, Satan, arranges for Jesus to be killed. Now, remember what I said about how my dad played chess? He'd have this stuff going on the right side of the board to grab your attention while he's slowly pursuing victory on the other side of the board. Keep that in mind. Satan kills Jesus. He's won, right? No, because he forgot about the other side of the chessboard. Jesus comes back from the dead. He's resurrected, very much alive. Checkmate. And that's God's checkmate move, his end game on the enemy of our soul. So what was God's long game? Well, everything we read in the Old Testament. God's end game, the resurrection, checkmate. I've never been great at chess because that's the point of chess. You don't recognize the end game for what it is until somebody's king topples over. Jesus' birth was God's beginning of his end game. That scene in the manger, the beginning of the end game. Jesus' death and resurrection, that's God's checkmate move. So, Christmas to me is a celebration of God's end game. All of history, his long game, comes down to the birth of the Messiah, who would die and be raised again so that I could be redeemed, so that I could be restored to my Father God. That's Christmas. All this other stuff, the Christmas tree, the gifts, that's just part and parcel of the joy of loving each other and being a family. But in truth, Christmas, the birth of the Messiah, is a celebration of God's brilliant end game and the fruit of his long game. It's really a cosmic game of chess. and our God is the master of it. So celebrate Christmas however you wish, but keep this thought in your mind as you revel in the joy of this season. Without Christmas, there's no Easter. Without Easter, there's no life. The Old Testament is God's long game. The Christmas story is the beginning of God's end game. The resurrection is God's checkmate move. No Christmas, no Easter. No Easter, no redemption. Celebrate God's end game. It began in a manger, and Satan never saw it coming. Checkmate. I have begun to publish my Bible studies on Amazon, make them available on Amazon. And if you were to go to Amazon.com and type my name in the search bar in Amazon, Paige Garwood, you're going to see one of the books that I've got there. You're going to see, right, like for instance, the first one that shows up, Essays and Beatitudes. Underneath it says part of, it's a series, part of a series of essays in. You click on that, and then you have the collection of books that I've got done so far. As you can see, I've got Essays in Ruth, Essays in Beatitudes, Essays in Revelation, the 7 churches of Asia Minor, Essays on Christmas, which is where this podcast comes from. Each one of these are based on the podcast series that I did related to this topics. And as you can see, some are available via Kindle, some are available only in print. I'm looking to fix all that, make sure everything's available in both types. But it's available there for you to purchase. And I've written them in 8.5 by 11 size notebooks, so there's room to write in because these are Bible studies. So feel free to go to Amazon.com and purchase these. You will be helping support me in my ongoing ministry with my Bible study writings that I'm doing, and I would be very grateful. So, having said that, here's my coffee. Folks, I'm out of here. Have a glorious day. Bye-bye. If you were to become a subscribing member to my Patreon site at patreon.com/coffeeBiblePage, for $5 a month, you will get for free the transcript for each podcast episode. And when a series is finished, you will also get access, again for free, to the PDF version of the book that I will publish. So I hope to see you over at patreon.com/coffeeBiblePage. Have a glorious day. Bye-bye.